The moment a 7-year-old told me my helicopter would explode, the wind stopped. And so did everything I thought I knew about control. The November air above Manhattan bit like glass, the kind of wind that strips away perfume and leaves only truth. I remember stepping out onto the rooftop of my tower, 40 stories of ambition beneath my heels, my name etched in chrome across the skyline. I was 27, the youngest female CEO to ever make the Fortune 500 list, and every stride I took toward that helicopter felt like proof that nothing could touch me. My suit was armor, my heels were weapons, my pulse beat in sync with the blades that churned the air in front of me. People always said power makes you fearless. They never mention how it makes you deaf. Marcus, my head of security, shouted something about clearing the pad, but the wind shredded his words. I only caught fragments. Unauthorized, maintenance, child. At first, I ignored him. There were always people who wandered too close to the perimeter. But then I saw them. A man in a grease-stained jumpsuit and a small girl clinging to his hand, her hair the color of strawberry sunlight in winter. They looked absurd against the gloss of the helicopter, like a photograph from another world that had slipped into mine. Marcus moved in instantly, barking orders, hand near his radio. The pilot was signaling to hurry. Patricia, my assistant, was already halfway inside, clutching the files for the Chicago merger. But I raised a hand. I don't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe boredom, maybe fate testing the edges of my logic. "Ma'am, we have to move," Marcus insisted, but I was already staring at the child. She stared back without blinking. Her coat was too large, her cheeks chapped red, but her eyes, those eyes, were so vividly blue they almost glowed against the gray November sky. "My daughter insisted she had to see you," the father said, voice trembling. "She's never done anything like this before." "What's your name?" I asked. The little girl stepped forward until the rotor wash lifted the ends of her hair like a halo. "Sophie." And then, calmly, without fear, she said it. "Your helicopter will explode." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Marcus actually laughed. One sharp, nervous sound. Patricia rolled her eyes. Even the pilot smirked. I might have smiled too if not for the way Sophie's expression didn't change, not even a flicker. Her father's face drained of blood. "Sophie, stop, please. Miss Sterling, I'm so sorry. She's been having nightmares since her mother died." But Sophie's voice cut through the noise, quiet yet exact. "Under the left engine. It's cracked. It will break in 73 seconds. There was no hysteria in her tone, no childish flourish. She said it like a fact already written somewhere the rest of us couldn't see. Patricia called out that we were late, that the committee wouldn't wait, for my superstition, and for a second, I almost let routine carry me forward. My life had always been measured in minutes, and every one of them had value. But the way the girl stood there, utterly still in the chaos, pulled at something I hadn't felt in years. "Ma'am?" Marcus pressed. "Shall I remove them?" I didn't answer. The world seemed to tilt slightly, the skyline shimmering in the rotor wash. Somewhere beneath the sound of engines I heard Sophie counting, her small voice carried by the wind. 60 seconds. My rational mind screamed that this was nonsense. The helicopter had been serviced that morning, checked by 3 separate engineers. I was letting grief and imagination bleed into business. And yet the number in her voice crawled up my spine like ice. Her father clutched her, apologizing again, stepping backward toward the stairwell. "She's confused, 45, she whispered. Patricia's voice reached me faintly. "Miss Sterling, please, we're due in Chicago." I turned toward her, meaning to step inside. But then Sophie spoke again, and the words punched the breath from my lungs. "Mommy showed me in the dream. She said you're important. She said I have to save you." That sentence broke something open inside me. I hadn't heard anyone call a mother mommy in years. Not since I'd buried mine after a car accident that taught me control was just another illusion. The memory hit like a gust of cold air, and suddenly the confidence that had built my empire felt as fragile as the frost gathering on the railing. 30 seconds, Sophie said, her voice urgent now. Marcus stepped closer. Ma'am, we have to move. This is ridiculous. Patricia reached from the cabin door. Victoria! I looked at Sophie, at her tiny hand gripping her father's sleeve, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I stepped away from the helicopter. 20 seconds. Her father turned in panic. Sophie, stop it! She shook her head violently, tears spilling. You don't understand. If she gets in... 10 seconds. Marcus swore under his breath. Enough. Ma'am, this is done. I raised my hand. Wait. He froze. 5, Sophie whispered. My pulse thundered, every part of me. The logical CEO, the strategist who'd stared down billion-dollar takeovers, wanted to dismiss it. But there was something ancient in her voice, something that made denial impossible. 4. I took one more step back. 3, Patricia shouted from inside. 2, the wind screamed. 1. The sound that followed wasn't cinematic. It was worse, smaller, more intimate, like metal crying. A high-pitched whine sliced through the rotor noise, then a crack, then chaos. The helicopter jerked sideways. A spray of fuel burst beneath the left engine, gleaming silver under the lights. The pilot reacted instantly, shutting everything down. Foam systems hissed alive, drowning the helipad in white frost. The smell of burning metal and jet fuel filled my lungs. Patricia stumbled out coughing, Marcus barking orders into his radio. I stood motionless. The spot where I'd been standing seconds ago was now a river of fuel that could have ignited mid-flight. I stared at the smoke curling upward, at the miracle of hesitation. When I finally turned, the maintenance door was closing. Through the narrow window, I saw Michael Chen carrying his daughter. She had her head against his shoulder, her small body limp with exhaustion. But just before the door sealed, she lifted her face. Her blue eyes found mine through the glass, and for a heartbeat, the noise and lights and panic vanished. Time folded in on itself. She didn't smile. She didn't look proud or frightened. She looked tired. Older than 7, like someone who'd already seen the ending of every story and was relieved just to have changed one of them. Her lips moved. 2 words. No sound. I read them anyway. Not yet. The door clicked shut, and the world roared back to life. The alarms, the shouting, the freezing wind carrying the smell of jet fuel and destiny I hadn't chosen. My helicopter lay wounded behind me, the skyline glinting like broken glass ahead. And somewhere down those stairs walked a child who knew more about my future than I did about my past. And for the first time since I built my empire, I felt something I couldn't quantify, predict, or control. Fear. As the smoke twisted into the gray Manhattan sky, I realized the strangest part wasn't that the girl had saved my life. It was that she'd said, "Not yet," as if she already knew exactly when it was supposed to end. People called it luck. I called it a statistical impossibility that stared back at me through a child's eyes. Luck. That was the word every journalist used. Fortune saves Fortune 500 CEO. It made for a perfect headline. The footage played on every major network, showing my helicopter leaking fuel, emergency crews blanketing the helipad with foam while I stood motionless in the chaos, a solitary figure in a white haze of disbelief. Commentators called it divine timing, coincidence, mechanical error. But I knew better. I'd spent my life calculating risk down to the decimal, and there was no formula for what had happened. The investigation was swift, clinical, and unnervingly efficient. Sterling Industries engineers confirmed a microscopic fracture in the fuel line, an anomaly invisible to standard inspections. The odds of it failing mid-flight were 1 in 8 million. The odds of a 7-year-old predicting it to the second? Immeasurable. Yet that's exactly what had happened. They said I was lucky, I said nothing. The board sent flowers and concern. My assistant Patricia filled my calendar with recovery time, which was really just an excuse for the PR team to control the narrative. Marcus insisted I increase security in case it had been sabotage, but I knew that wasn't it. Sabotage comes from men with motives. This had come from somewhere else entirely. For 48 hours, I tried to function. I signed papers, took calls, approved budgets, all the meaningless machinery of power grinding on while my mind stayed anchored to that rooftop. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. The little girl in the oversized coat, hair caught in the wind, voice steady as she counted down my death. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed of her. Sometimes she was standing at the edge of the helipad, staring into the fog. Sometimes she was in my office, turning the pages of contracts I couldn't read. In one dream, she stood beside my childhood mirror and whispered, "You weren't supposed to survive yet." I woke drenched in sweat, my chest tight with something between dread and guilt. Guilt for what, I didn't know. But it sat there, heavy and sharp, as if I'd stolen something from the world by surviving. By the third day, the media frenzy had dulled. Analysts were already shifting focus to the rescheduled Chicago merger. My PR team crafted statements, words like resilience and unshakable leadership, thrown around to make me sound human. But I couldn't read them. The documents blurred. My hand shook when I tried to sign. I didn't tell anyone that the sound of rotor blades now made me flinch. I didn't tell them that I'd ordered the helicopter grounded indefinitely, even though it had been repaired. Fear wasn't a currency I could afford to trade in. That night, as the city pulsed beneath my penthouse windows, I opened a bottle of wine I didn't taste and stared at the skyline. I should have felt victorious, blessed even. But all I felt was unfinished. The girl hadn't said, "Don't go." She'd said, "Not yet." And those two words kept unraveling inside me like a thread pulled from a very old fabric. Who was she? How had she known? At first I told myself I wouldn't look. I had a company to run, a reputation to preserve. CEOs didn't chase ghosts. But control had always been my drug, and this mystery was the one variable I couldn't master. I had to understand it, if only to make the numbers make sense again. By midnight, I was in my office. The building was silent, the kind of silence that feels conspiratorial, humming with invisible watchers. I turned on only one lamp. Its light carved a small circle of gold amid the glass and steel, reflecting my own exhaustion back at me. I opened my laptop, logged into the Sterling Industries employee directory, and typed, "Michael Chen." The system took a moment to respond, as if deciding whether I deserved the answer. Then it filled the screen. Name, Michael Chen. Position, maintenance, level 2. Tenure, 1 year, 8 months. Department, facilities. Supervisor, Roger Hale. Performance, exemplary. His address was listed in Queens. No disciplinary actions, no red flags. Just another invisible worker in a city built on invisible people. But it was the emergency contact line that made me pause. Eleanor Park, relationship neighbor babysitter. The simplicity of it made my throat tighten. These were not people who should have crossed paths with me. Yet one of them had, and because of her, I was alive. Alive. The word felt heavier than it ever had. I pulled up the incident footage from security archives. I told myself it was to review protocol, but I'd already done that with the investigators. This time I watched for her. There she was, 7 years old, standing in the wind like she belonged there. I slowed the footage, frame by frame, watching how her lips moved with the countdown. There was no hesitation, no guesswork. She knew. When the explosion hit, I paused the video at the moment her father turned to carry her away. Her small hand clutched his sleeve, her face hidden against his shoulder. But just before the door closed, she looked back, directly into the camera, directly at me. I leaned closer to the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. It was impossible, but for a split second, I could have sworn her eyes shifted. Paler, brighter, like light refracting through water. I replayed that single frame again and again until the digital pixels blurred into static. My rational brain whispered explanations, optical error, compression artifact, but instinct whispered something else. Something older. I couldn't stop thinking about her voice. "Mommy said you're important." By 2 a.m., my office was littered with notes. Employee rosters, maintenance schedules, archived repair logs, anything that might connect back to Michael Chen. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through shift records, checking dates, times, anything to explain how a child could have known an engineering fault that 3 inspection teams missed. Nothing. The longer I searched, the more my reflection in the dark window started to look like a stranger. My power suit, my jewelry, my name etched on the glass wall. It all seemed absurd. I'd built a kingdom of data, but now I was haunted by a 7-year-old's whisper that defied every algorithm I'd ever trusted. I don't know when I noticed the time. The clock on my desk read 2:47 a.m., and that's when my desk phone rang. The sound was so sudden, so sharp against the hush of the office, that I nearly knocked over my glass reaching for it. "Ms. Sterling?" The voice on the other end was hesitant, uncertain. It was the night guard from the lobby. There's a Michael Chen here. He says it's urgent." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed, my mind scrambling to reconcile what I was hearing. Michael Chen. At this hour, the last time I'd seen him, he'd been carrying his daughter through a door that was supposed to end our connection forever. "I'll be right down," I heard myself say. As I hung up, a shiver ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. The child had warned me I wasn't supposed to die yet. But as I looked at the elevator doors sliding open across the room, I realized something else. Whatever that little girl had started on that rooftop wasn't finished, not even close. At 2:47 a.m., security called. "Ms. Sterling, Michael Chen is here, says it's urgent." He came in wearing a janitor's badge, but spoke like a scientist who'd misplaced the laws of nature. When the elevator doors opened, I expected to see a desperate father begging for his job, or perhaps a man looking to cash in on a headline. What I didn't expect was composure. Michael Chen stood there with his hands clasped tightly around a folder, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, yet steady, like a man who had rehearsed this moment 100 times and still didn't know how it would end. His uniform was the same faded blue from the rooftop, but the way he carried himself didn't fit it. There was precision in his posture, the kind that doesn't fade even when life tries to grind it away. I gestured for him to sit, but he shook his head, clutching that folder tighter. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Sterling," he said, voice roughened by fatigue. "I know I shouldn't have come like this, but Sophie..." He stopped, the name catching in his throat. "She wouldn't sleep. She kept saying she had to tell you something else, said you'd understand once you saw me." The name alone pulled a thread through my chest. Sophie. That impossible child whose voice had saved my life and ruined my peace in the same breath. I gestured again to the chair. This time he sat, the weight of a sleepless world in his shoulders. "She's been having these episodes," he continued, eyes fixed on his hands, "since her mother died. They called them grief responses at first, nightmares, flashbacks, but they weren't. They never were." I leaned back, studying him. The measured rhythm of his voice didn't fit his story. "You're a maintenance worker," I said carefully, more statement than question. He gave a dry, humorless laugh. "That's what my badge says. But before that, I was Dr. Michael Chen, quantum mechanics, MIT. My wife Amy was a neuroscientist at Columbia. We met at a symposium on consciousness theory. We thought we understood how the mind works, how probability behaves." His voice faltered. "We were wrong." I felt the floor of logic shift beneath me. The way he spoke, clean, deliberate, wasn't the language of superstition or hysteria. It was the voice of a man dismantling the world he once trusted. He opened the folder. Inside were clippings, pages of handwritten notes, and a few photographs, Sophie at different ages, smiling in none of them. It started small, he said. A month after Amy died. Sophie woke me at 3 a.m. crying that the milk in the fridge was bad on the inside. I checked it. It expired in 2 weeks. But the next morning it smelled like paint thinner. He flipped to another page. A few days later, she refused to get in the elevator in our building. She said it was tired. I forced her anyway. It jammed between floors for 6 hours. He slid a newspaper clipping across my desk. FDR school bus collision. 3 dead, 12 injured. She told our neighbor's son not to take the bus that morning. Said the driver would be sleepy. He didn't go. The bus was crushed by a semi. I read the headline again, the black print seeming to pulse beneath my fingers. My mouth went dry. So she has premonitions? I asked, hating how absurd the word sounded coming from someone like me. I called them probability anomalies at first, he said. That's what made sense to a scientist. But they're not random. She sees events before they collapse into reality. Amy used to say it was like Sophie could hear the universe before it spoke. The phrasing struck me. Poetic, terrifying. And you think that's what happened on the helipad? He nodded slowly. She saw the explosion in a dream. Woke up screaming your name 2 nights before it happened. She's never seen a dream that clear. And when she insisted on going to you that day, I couldn't stop her. I stood and walked to the window, needing distance from his intensity. The city shimmered below, its order deceptive. I had built my life on logic, on data. The idea of a child glimpsing the future like pages of an unfinished book belonged in myth, not in my office. Still, the memory of her eyes refused to let me dismiss it. You understand how this sounds, I said finally. Like madness, he finished for me. Yes, I know. I thought so too. He picked up a photo from the folder and handed it to me. Sophie, sitting cross-legged on the floor, crayon in hand. Behind her, taped to the wall, were drawings, dozens of them, each showing accidents, disasters, places I recognized from news reports. She draws what she sees, he said, before it happens. The edges of my control began to fray. So what do you want from me, Mr. Chen? Sympathy? Funding? Media protection? None of that, he said quietly. I came because she said it isn't over. I turned sharply. What isn't? He hesitated, and for the first time, fear cracked through his calm. Whatever she saw next. She said it has to do with you. Said you're part of what's coming. For a moment, I could hear only the hum of the city far below. You believe her? I said softly. He met my eyes. After she saved your life? Yes. I believe her. And so should you. I wanted to argue. I wanted to remind him that logic doesn't bow to miracles, that I had built an empire by refusing to believe in anything I couldn't measure. But the words caught in my throat, because somewhere deep down, I already did believe her. I had sensed the second that helicopter screamed and died in front of me. She said something else, he continued, voice barely above a whisper. After we got home, she said the explosion wasn't supposed to be the end. It was just the beginning of something trying to stop her from warning you. I sank back into my chair, pulse thudding. Something? She calls it the noise, he said. Says it lives between the whispers. Every time she has a vision, she hears it, like static trying to drown out the message. It's getting louder. The air between us thickened, heavy with something I couldn't name. I don't expect you to understand, he said finally. But Sophie wanted me to tell you she'll see you again soon. She says you need to listen when the whispers come, even if they sound like madness. Especially then. I stared at him, the rational part of my mind desperate to shut the door on this conversation. But curiosity, cold, precise curiosity, anchored me to my chair. Why me? Why would a child like that even know who I am? He exhaled slowly. That's what terrifies me. Because she doesn't just know you, Miss Sterling. She dreams you. Says she's been seeing you for months, long before the helicopter. She draws your face. She knows your office, your watch, your voice. I didn't believe her until now. For the first time, I couldn't hide the tremor in my voice. What does she see next? Michael's eyes dropped to the floor. She won't tell me, only that it's not over. The words hung in the air like static. Not over. I looked down at the photo still in my hand, at the child surrounded by drawings of tragedies yet to happen, and for the first time in years I felt powerless. Not because I didn't understand the threat, but because I couldn't predict it. She says it's not over, Michael murmured. She says you're part of what's coming. Queens smelled of radiator steam and secrets. I'd spent my adult life in the high glass air of Manhattan, where everything smelled like money. Leather, ozone, ambition. Queens was different. It smelled like stories that refused to die, of radiator heat and fried garlic, of 1,000 private lives pressed together under layers of noise. I shouldn't have been there. CEOs didn't drive to working-class neighborhoods in the middle of the night to chase the ghost of a child's prophecy. But something stronger than reason had pulled me from my penthouse to this building that sagged under the weight of forgotten decades. The apartment door had 3 locks and a mezuzah, its brass worn from years of touch. Michael's voice was quiet when he said, "She hasn't slept in 2 days. The whispers keep her awake." Inside, the place was small but immaculate. Bookshelves overflowed with physics journals and picture books alike, the kind of uneasy harmony that only a scientist-turned-single parent could maintain. On one wall hung Sophie's drawings, hundreds of them, lines of crayon forming patterns that felt almost mathematical. Clocks, trees with too many, branches, faces blurred into shadows. Mrs. Park, the elderly woman listed as their emergency contact, stood from the couch as we entered. Her eyes, sharp beneath her kind wrinkles, missed nothing. "The helicopter woman," she said softly, her Korean accent turning the words musical. "Sophie said you would come." She offered tea. I refused, though my hands ached for something to hold. The air here felt thick, vibrating with something unseen. Sophie appeared from her bedroom door. Pajamas wrinkled, hair tangled, eyes wide awake. She held a stuffed elephant that looked as if it had been loved to pieces. For a moment, she looked every bit the child she was supposed to be. Then she met my gaze, and that illusion died. "You came," she said simply. Her voice wasn't accusing or relieved. It was inevitable. "Yes," I managed. "I came. The whisper said you might not. They're not always right." Mrs. Park's knitting needles clicked in the background, a metronome of calm against the tension winding through the room. Sophie crossed the space between us until she stood so close I could smell the faint sweetness of children's shampoo. She tilted her head like she was listening to something only she could hear. "They're quieter now," she said. "They like you." "Who?" I asked. "The whispers," she said matter-of-factly. "They show me the branches, the ways things could go. Each branch is a path, a choice. You were supposed to go on the helicopter. That was one branch, but I changed it. Now everything's messy." "Messy?" She nodded. "When you don't die, more paths appear. New branches grow. Some are good, some are terrible. The whispers are trying to help me see which is which, but they're angry too. They don't like when someone changes the plan." The rational part of me tried to anchor the conversation, but my pulse was betraying me. I remembered the exact second she'd said 73 seconds on the rooftop, how her voice had sounded detached from reality, like she was reading from a script she hadn't written. "Why me?" I asked. Her gaze flicked upward, searching the ceiling for invisible constellations. "Because you're the key branch. Everything grows from you." Michael stepped forward, his voice careful. "Sophie, maybe that's enough." But she cut him off. "No, she needs to know about December 15th. My body went cold. "What about it?" "That's when the branches come together," she said. "The old path where you die and the new one where you live, they meet there. The whispers show fire and falling glass. People screaming. A clock that stops at 11:47. I sank into the nearest chair, the words pressing against my temples like a migraine. And you're sure it's connected to me? Sophie nodded. Everything is. You're standing at the root. Mrs. Park set a teacup in front of me anyway. Drink, she said softly. It helps. The warmth of it steadied my shaking hands. Sophie, I asked quietly, when you see these things, do you see me? Her eyes flicked toward mine. Sometimes. In dreams. You're always walking through empty rooms. There's a music box playing, but it's broken. You keep looking for someone, but you don't know who. The air left my lungs. That dream, those rooms, no one knew about them. I'd had it for years, ever since my parents' accident. A long corridor lined with doors, everyone locked, and that same faint melody playing somewhere behind them. How do you know that? I whispered. Sophie frowned, frustrated. Because it's not just a dream, it's a memory you forgot. Michael's hand tightened on the back of her chair. Sophie, enough. But she didn't stop. The whispers show me what's missing in people. Yours is big, like a hole. You built your company to fill it, but it's still there. The whispers say it's hidden behind the song from the music box. Music box? She nodded. You had one when you were little. Something happened to it. Something important. I stared at her, trying to find the seam between delusion and truth. You're saying there's something in my past, something I've forgotten, that connects to all this? She just looked at me, her eyes far too knowing for 7 years old. Not forgotten, she said softly. Taken. The words hit like a physical blow. I almost laughed to break the tension, but it came out strangled. Taken? What does that even mean? Mrs. Park's voice was calm but heavy. Sometimes the mind locks away pain too great to survive. Amy, her mother, believed Sophie might be able to hear what others bury. Amy was a neuroscientist, I murmured. She studied consciousness. Yes, Michael said quietly. And after Sophie started hearing the whispers, Amy said they weren't voices from the dead or divine. They were echoes from alternate versions of ourselves, probabilities bleeding through. That's impossible. He gave a bitter smile. So is a 7-year-old predicting an engine failure to the second. The room felt smaller. My own breath sounded too loud. I looked at Sophie again. She was drawing something on the back of an envelope. 2 stick figures holding hands under falling buildings. That's the future, she said, sensing my gaze. You and me. December 15th. I moved closer. And what happens then? She shook her head. I don't know yet. The whispers are hiding it. They say you have to remember first. You have to find the music box. My pulse hammered against my ribs. Why? What's in it? Her eyes filled with tears. Something that belongs to you. Something someone else took. And when you find it, everything changes. Who took it? She looked past me, her gaze going distant, like she was watching a movie only she could see. I can't see their face, she said. It's dark, but they know you. They've been waiting. A chill slid down my spine. Mrs. Park reached for Sophie's hand. Enough, child. Rest. But Sophie's next words froze me where I stood. Something was taken from you, she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. And on December 15th, they'll try to take more. The apartment seemed to tilt around me, the ticking radiator suddenly deafening. I looked at Michael, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. In that moment, I realized I wasn't chasing a mystery anymore. I was already inside it. Something was taken from you, Sophie said. And on December 15th, they'll try to take more. Some files hide data, others hide entire lives. I had built an empire on knowing things other people didn't. Numbers, patterns, secrets buried in financial ledgers. Knowledge was power. But that night, sitting across from James Donnelly in my glass-walled office, I learned that some knowledge doesn't empower you. It annihilates you. The city beyond the windows was a constellation of sleepless ambition. But the light in my office was sterile, surgical, a spotlight cutting through the illusion of safety. My desk was cluttered with documents James had spread across it. Hospital records, discharge forms, confidential memos, the kind of paper trail that should have been erased years ago. He looked older than I remembered, his usually calm expression carrying the weight of what he was about to say. "Victoria," he began, "you told me to dig into Michael Chen and his daughter. I found something. But it's not about them, not really. It's about you." The words didn't register at first. "About me?" He nodded, sliding a thin folder toward me. "St. Bartholomew's Hospital, February 2018. The name alone sent a pulse of unease through me. That was the year of my accident. "According to public record, yes," James said quietly. "A car accident, followed by emergency surgery. But that's not what these documents show." I flipped open the folder. The first page was a patient admission form. My name, my signature. Diagnosis, complications, 3rd trimester distress. I froze. "That's impossible." James's tone remained steady. "You were pregnant, Victoria." The words landed like a physical blow. "No, I would remember." He hesitated before replying. "You don't, because they made sure you wouldn't." He handed me another file, a discharge summary stamped "Confidential, Cognitive Reconstruction Unit." It listed a procedure I'd never heard of: Selective Memory Suppression Protocol, Type 3 Neural Adjustment, performed by Dr. Marcus Thornfield. "I had this verified," James said. "Thornfield left St. Bartholomew's 1 month later, set up a private clinic in Switzerland for high-paying clients who wanted to forget trauma or secrets. You were one of his first test cases." The room seemed to tilt. The air felt thin. "So you're saying they, what, erased a pregnancy?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened another folder, birth records from the same hospital, same date. "2 births recorded the night of February 12th, he said. "Yours at 11:43 p.m., and Amy Chen's at 11:51. Same operating room, same medical team." I stared at the names, at the neatly typed timestamps. "Amy Chen?" "Sophie's mother," he confirmed. "But here's where it gets strange." He placed 2 more documents side by side. One was a stillbirth certificate. My name at the top, signed by Dr. Thornfield at 11:52 p.m. The other was a live birth certificate, Amy Chen, signed by the same doctor at 11:53. 1 minute apart. James tapped the documents with a pen. Both babies weighed the same, 6 pounds, 2 ounces. Both had a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark on the left shoulder. The blood drained from my face. I remembered nothing of that night, nothing of a child, but a faint image flickered through my mind. A melody, a hospital room blurred by light, the smell of antiseptic. A lullaby that didn't quite sound right. "This can't be real," I whispered. "I've verified everything," he said. "The medical logs were altered a week later. Files deleted, identities reassigned. You were discharged under recovery from trauma. Amy Chen went home with a healthy newborn, Sophie." I felt my pulse in my throat. "You're telling me my baby died, and then came back to life in someone else's arms?" James's eyes softened. "I'm telling you, Victoria, your baby never died." Silence stretched between us, long enough for the city's hum to become deafening. I pressed my palms against the desk to steady myself. How could this happen? Why me? He hesitated. Thornfield wasn't just a doctor. He was part of a private program, funded through shell accounts tied to St. Bartholomew's research division. They were experimenting with prenatal neurology, cognitive mapping in infants, trying to study what they called inherited consciousness patterns. My voice cracked. "You mean they were experimenting on mothers and newborns?" He nodded. "Women who were young, isolated, financially vulnerable. Some were told their babies had died during childbirth. Others were implanted with false memories to cover it up." I wanted to scream, to tear the files apart, to burn the entire hospital to the ground. But my body refused to move. I could only whisper, "Amy didn't know." "No," James said softly. "She believed Sophie was hers. But the hospital staff, someone higher up, altered the paperwork. They swapped the identification tags." The edges of my vision blurred. My thoughts spiraled between disbelief and horror. Sophie's eyes, her certainty, the way she'd known things no one could know, none of it made sense, yet suddenly, it all did. Where is Thornfield now? Zurich. And he's not hiding, James said. He's working for a medical foundation owned by a holding company, Dunor Holdings. The name sliced through me like ice. Dunor? As in Marcus Dunor? He's been circling my company for years. James nodded grimly. He was on the board of St. Bartholomew's during your hospitalization. He signed off on the funding for Thornfield's program. I sank back into my chair, the full shape of the truth beginning to form, jagged and unbearable. They took my child, I whispered, then made me forget she ever existed. Not just you, James said. They took others. We found records of at least 37 births flagged for data reassignment. The number hit like an earthquake. 37? He nodded. Amy Chen was one of them. She died before she could expose it. Her husband went underground after her death. And Sophie. Sophie started showing signs none of the others did. She sees the future, I said quietly. James hesitated, then nodded. Or the past, or every possibility between. The city lights flickered in the glass behind him, refracting into patterns that made me dizzy. For years, I'd believed power meant control, but this was chaos in its purest form, a stolen life, a child who could see the collapse of timelines, a secret buried under money and blood. James, I said, my voice trembling, I need proof. DNA, documentation, something. He slid one final document across the desk. You already have it. It was a hospital security still, time-stamped February 12, 2018, 11:58 p.m. The image was grainy, distorted by static. A young woman, me, barely conscious on a gurney, eyes unfocused. A nurse was setting something in a box beside me. Even through the blur, I recognized it. The music box, the one from my dreams. My hand went numb. Where did you get this? From Thornfield's archives, James said. It was logged as personal property, later transferred to storage by order of Dunor Holdings, the same company you're supposed to meet with on December 15th. The air left my lungs. They've had it all along. Whatever's in that box, James said, is the key. Thornfield called it the anchor. He said it contained a fragment of the suppressed memory, something that could reawaken what they buried. I stared at the photo again, my own face frozen in time, a stranger to myself. Everything Sophie had said. The whispers, the music box, something taken. It all converged here. James closed the folder with a quiet finality and pushed it toward me. There's no easy way to say this, he said, but the records match perfectly. Same weight, same birthmark, same minute. I looked up at him, my hands trembling. What are you saying? He met my eyes. Victoria, Sophie is yours. James slid the report forward. Same weight, same birthmark, same minute. Victoria, Sophie is yours. Empires collapse quietly, usually the moment their builder remembers what really matters. There are moments in life that don't break you with noise. They unravel you in silence. For me, it was the quiet hum of the city beneath my office as I stared at the folder James Donnelly had left on my desk. The truth spread open like a wound. My daughter. My child. Sophie Chen was not a miracle stranger who had wandered into my life. She was the life I'd lost, the one they had stolen, erased, and buried beneath 7 years of success and lies. The words blurred as I reread them, my own name typed beside phrases like maternal DNA, selective memory suppression, cognitive trauma response. For years, I'd worn my past like armor. The car accident, the therapy, the long nights when I convinced myself that emptiness was ambition. It had all been built on a lie. I was a mother who'd been made to forget her child. At first, I felt nothing. Shock is merciful like that. It gives you seconds to adjust before the pain begins its slow, surgical crawl through your veins. And when it came, it didn't come as tears. It came as rage. I tore through my office, throwing files, shattering glass, ripping through every illusion of control I'd spent a decade building. The empire I had forged from pure willpower suddenly looked grotesque. Cold towers of profit funded by the silence of the woman I used to be. How do you quantify 7 years of motherhood stolen? How do you measure the sound of a lullaby you never got to sing? When the anger burned itself out, guilt took its place. Heavy, suffocating guilt. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I hadn't known. Because somewhere my daughter had grown up believing another woman was her mother, and I had lived in ignorance while she saw nightmares meant for me. I thought of Sophie's eyes, the way they had looked through me on that helipad, as if she'd recognized me even when I hadn't recognized her. The memory gutted me. I had met my child for the first time, and all I had seen was a stranger's daughter with a strange gift. James stood silently by the window, giving me space. When I finally spoke, my voice was raw. "Denor knew." He nodded grimly. "Yes. He was part of the funding board for Thornfield's program. When St. Bartholomew's was investigated for the trafficking scandal, he buried the files. Most of the evidence was transferred to Dunor Holdings' private archives." I gripped the edge of the desk, steadying myself. "He's been circling my company for years, trying to buy it, merge with it." "Why?" "Because you're the only loose thread left," James said. "If you start remembering, his entire operation collapses. Every secret he buried under medical research and philanthropy comes undone." It made sense in the most horrifying way. The acquisition deal scheduled for December 15th, the meeting that Sophie had warned about, wasn't a merger. It was a silencing. I walked to the window and stared at the reflection staring back at me. My own face looked unfamiliar, hard where it used to be soft, empty where it should have been full of light. The reflection of a woman who had traded her child for power and didn't even know it. "I was pregnant," I whispered to the glass. "They told me I lost her. They made me believe it." James's voice was gentle but unyielding. Thornfield's suppression technique wasn't perfect. He called it a memory partition. Your brain stored fragments as dreams. That's why you kept seeing the music box. "The music box," I repeated. "Sophie mentioned it, said it holds something I need to remember." "Thornfield called it an anchor," James said. "It's in Denor's possession now, locked away. I've traced the shipment records. It was moved to a storage facility in Brooklyn 2 years ago." The air around us felt electric, charged with grief and purpose. For years, I'd defined myself by what I built. Numbers, buildings, influence. But now I saw it all for what it was. A monument to forgetting. "They took her from me," I said quietly. "And they used my company to cover it up." James hesitated. "Victoria, this goes beyond you. Thornfield's program didn't end with Sophie. There are dozens of children, 37 that we know of. Some were adopted, others placed in controlled environments, all of them showing irregular cognitive development. If Dunor's still running experiments..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The image was clear enough. Children like Sophie, manipulated, studied, their gifts turned into data points. "I won't let him touch her again," I said. "Or any of them." James studied me for a long moment. "What are you planning?" I looked down at the scattered files on my desk. Birth records, falsified certificates, corporate ledgers, and realized that every piece of paper represented a brick in the prison I'd built for myself. "I'm going to tear it all down," I said simply. "Every lie, every company, every deal that made this possible." He nodded once, the ghost of respect in his expression. "Then you'll need help, people you can trust." "I don't trust anyone," I said, then paused. "Except her." Sophie. The name no longer felt foreign in my mouth. It felt like a heartbeat. The next hours blurred into motion. I cleared my calendar, canceled the Chicago trip permanently, and sent Patricia home. For the first time, the empire I'd built felt irrelevant, small compared to the gravity of what lay ahead. When the office finally emptied, I sat alone in the dim glow of the monitors, surrounded by the ghosts of documents that had defined my life. I thought of Sophie's drawings, the trees with branching paths, the collapsing buildings, the two figures holding hands. I understood now. She had been trying to show me not just the future, but the fracture in our past. Around 3 a.m., I found myself tracing the embossed logo on one of Denor's proposal folders. The man had been a shadow in my professional life for years, offering buyouts, mergers, partnerships that never felt quite right. I had always trusted my instincts to reject him. Now I knew why. Some buried part of me had recognized the danger even through the fog of erased memories. The phone buzzed. A message from Patricia, sent earlier that night but unread until now. Package from the Chen residence delivered to your office. Sophie asked me to make sure you got it. I froze. My gaze darted across the desk until I saw it. A small white envelope, untouched, lying beneath the chaos of files. My hands shook as I picked it up. The handwriting was uneven, the letters large and deliberate, drawn in purple crayon. I tore it open slowly, terrified of what I might find. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in half. The drawing was simple. Two figures, one tall, one small, standing before a city skyline painted in childlike strokes of blue and gray. They were holding hands. The taller figure wore a suit. The smaller one had yellow hair. Above them, in thick purple crayon, were 4 words. You get to choose. And beneath them, smaller, almost hidden in the curve of a drawn sun, choose us. For a moment I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just a message, it was a plea. All the equations, deals, and mergers that had once defined my life dissolved into meaninglessness. The choice Sophie was giving me wasn't about business or survival. It was about what kind of person I wanted to be when the truth came crashing down. Mother or machine, love or legacy. I folded the drawing carefully, holding it to my chest as if it might vanish. For 7 years, I'd lived as a woman who conquered everything but remembered nothing. Now, for the first time, I knew exactly who I was and what had been taken from me. Inside Sophie's envelope, a purple crayon message read, You get to choose us. In a safe house, a 7-year-old drew the future, while the adults argued about saving it. The safe house didn't look like salvation. It looked like surrender. Peeling wallpaper, flickering lights, the faint smell of old wood soaked in 1,000 forgotten arguments. But within those walls, I found something my skyscrapers and boardrooms had never given me. Purpose. Michael Chen sat at the kitchen table, head bowed over a clutter of blueprints and coffee cups. Mrs. Park dozed quietly on the couch, rosary beads slipping through her fingers as she murmured prayers for a world she couldn't fully understand. And Sophie, barefoot and cross-legged on the floor, was drawing. Her crayons moved with unnerving certainty. Red arcs of flame, black towers, silver lines that might have been streets or scars. Every few minutes, she would pause, tilt her head as though listening to something none of us could hear, then start again. I stood by the window, staring out at the rain-streaked street, wondering how my life had come to this. Hiding in a rented apartment with a janitor, a psychic child, and a grandmotherly witness while my empire trembled somewhere beyond the skyline. December 15th, Sophie said suddenly, not looking up from her drawing. It's close. Michael flinched. Sweetheart, maybe you shouldn't. She cut him off gently. It doesn't stop just because we don't talk about it. I turned toward her, my voice steadier than I felt. Tell me what you see, Sophie. She lifted the page. The drawing showed a building in flames. Mine. Sterling Tower, unmistakable, even in crayon. The top floors bled red, the lower levels gray with smoke. Around it, stick figures ran in jagged lines. It starts in the basement, she said. Fire that eats upward, too fast, too bright. They call it thermite. It burns through steel. My breath caught. Thermite. Not random, not an accident. Sabotage. How many? I asked. She looked up, her eyes far too old for her face. 217 if we do nothing. The number was too precise to be a guess. It was a death toll. Michael scrubbed a hand over his face, eyes hollow. Victoria, this is insane. We can't stop what we can't understand. We can't afford not to, I said sharply. She's been right before, every time. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the soft scratch of Sophie's crayon. She was drawing again, this time a circle of arrows pointing away from the burning tower. That's the evacuation, she murmured. We have to move them before the fire starts. I crouched beside her, my voice low. How? 2 ways, she said. Plan A and Plan B. Her tone was eerily matter-of-fact, like a child reciting multiplication tables instead of dictating the difference between life and death. Plan A, she continued. You start a fire first, small, in the basement. It makes everyone leave before the real one starts. Nobody dies. The whispers say that works if we time it right. Michael shot to his feet. You can't be serious. You want to set your own building on fire? Yes, I said, my voice calm, resolved. If it means saving 200 lives. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me anymore. You're not thinking clearly. I've never been clearer. Sophie's crayon froze mid-stroke. Plan B, she said softly, is harder. I looked at her. What's Plan B? She met my gaze. You tell the world the truth. All of it. Denor, the hospital, the children. The whispers say once it's spoken, it can't be taken back. A live stream. My confession. The collapse of everything I'd built. I hesitated. If I do that, I lose everything. Sophie's expression didn't change. You already lost what mattered most. The rest is just noise. Michael sank back into his chair, shaking his head. You don't understand what you're up against. Denor has government contracts, private security, influence you can't even see. If he realizes you know, he'll bury you, and Sophie. He's already tried, I said. We're still here. The rain outside thickened into a relentless drumming. It felt like the world itself was trying to warn us, pounding on the windows. Mrs. Park stirred from the couch, eyes opening just long enough to murmur, Fire cleans, but it also reveals. Be careful which you call upon. Her words sent a chill through me. Michael pushed the blueprints toward me. If you're going through with this, we'll need an access route. Maintenance corridors connect the generator rooms to the foundation. I can get us in. And the fire suppression system? I asked. I can override it, he said reluctantly. Trigger an alarm sequence without real damage. But if anything goes wrong... It won't, I said, though the tremor in my chest betrayed the lie. Sophie was now drawing something else. Lines curving inward, spiraling around a small box. What's that? I asked. The music box, she whispered. You'll need it before the 15th. The whispers say it's the key to stopping him. Stopping who? Denor, she said, voice so low it was almost a breath. He's been trying to open the whispers. He wants to use them. But if he does, they'll never stop. I exchanged a glance with Michael. He looked pale, drained. Victoria, he said softly. What if we're too late? I shook my head. We're not. We can't be. I'd spent my life fighting for mergers, contracts, power, but none of it had ever felt like this. Raw, terrifying, real. I wasn't trying to save an empire anymore. I was trying to save my child. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight. Sophie put her crayon down and rubbed her eyes. They're quiet now, she said. The whispers. But they don't like what we're doing. What do they say? I asked. She hesitated, gaze drifting toward the rain-blurred window. They say every choice costs something. Plan A saves the people. Plan B saves the truth. But we can't have both. The words sank deep, cold and final. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Then we'll make a third plan, I said. One where no one dies. She looked at me sadly, as if she'd already seen the future and knew that wasn't how it worked. Someone dies retrieving the music box, she whispered. The whispers won't say who. The air seemed to still. Even the rain went silent. Michael turned toward her, his face ashen. Sophie. But she only picked up a black crayon and began drawing again, her small hand shaking as she colored a dark shape beside the tower. A figure standing in flames, nameless, faceless, waiting. And I understood, with a hollow certainty that made my chest ache, that whatever lay ahead, the fire had already begun. "Someone dies retrieving the music box," Sophie whispered. "The whispers won't say who." The city above slept while I broke into its bones. Manhattan was a different creature before dawn. Its power muted, its glass towers hollowed into silhouettes against a pale, merciless sky. The streets were empty, except for the ghosts of last night's rain and the hum of distant machinery. But beneath those streets, beneath the steel and concrete arteries that fed the city, there were older bones. Forgotten corridors. Secrets that had never seen daylight. James Donnelly drove without speaking. The dashboard clock read 3:12 a.m., the digital numbers flickering like a heartbeat. In the passenger seat, I watched the reflection of the city slide across the window, reflections of everything I was about to destroy. We parked 2 blocks from the Dunor Holdings Tower, a monolith of black glass that stabbed upward like a blade through the fog. The building looked dead from a distance, but James had already confirmed the truth. Third-shift maintenance inside, security cameras looping for 12 minutes, courtesy of a forged access code that had cost us nearly $500,000 in bribes. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly, as we stepped into the alley that led to the sub-basement entrance. "No," I said. "But I've learned that certainty is just another word for blindness." We moved through shadows. The air smelled of dust and ozone, of machinery that hadn't slept in decades. James swiped the access card. The steel door hissed open, releasing a stale breath of recycled air. Inside, the service elevator waited, its walls dented and scratched, its buttons worn to anonymity. The descent began in silence, only the whine of ancient cables breaking the stillness. "Your father built this building, didn't he?" James asked finally. "Parts of it," I said. "Before Dunor bought him out. He always said the city has layers, like time. You can dig deep enough, and you'll find where truth was buried." The elevator jolted to a stop 7 levels below ground. The doors opened onto darkness, thick and complete. We stepped out, our flashlights cutting thin white paths through dust. The corridors stretched endlessly, lined with pipes that dripped condensation like veins leaking secrets. "Vault should be at the far end," James said, checking the schematics on his tablet. "Last registered as Sterling Private Storage, Transfer Holdings 2009. The deeper we went, the colder it grew, as if the building itself wanted to freeze us out. Finally, we reached a reinforced door half buried in shadow. My father's name was embossed faintly on the corroded brass plate. A. Sterling, Private Archive. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I pressed my palm against the cold metal, imagining him standing here decades ago, locking away something he never meant to be found. James bypassed the biometric lock with the precision of a man who'd trespassed in more places than he'd admit. The panel blinked green, and the vault opened with a sigh that sounded almost human. Inside was a museum of memory. Dust-covered crates stacked in orderly rows, leather-bound ledgers, framed photographs wrapped in plastic. My father's handwriting marked each box in neat, deliberate strokes. Research notes, patents, personal effects, and in the center, on a small pedestal, was a porcelain music box. It was exactly as I remembered it from my dreams, white with gold trim, a tiny dancer poised forever mid-twirl. The porcelain was cracked in one place, faintly scorched along the edges. I lifted it gently, afraid it might disintegrate in my hands. The key was still in place, tarnished, but intact. I turned it once. The melody that spilled out was wrong, just as it had been in my dreams. Not broken, but altered, the notes forming a pattern instead of a song. James frowned. "That's not music, it's code." "Morse," I realized. My father was Navy before Sterling Industries. He used Morse in his private journals. James began decoding, tapping the rhythm softly against his thigh as the notes repeated. C-O-O-R-D. His voice trailed off as the message took shape. Coordinates and a date. February 12th, 2018. The night Sophie was born. A shiver moved through me that had nothing to do with the cold. James turned the music box over, inspecting the bass. A small latch clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment lined with felt. Inside lay a single photograph and a USB drive, sealed in a plastic sleeve. He held up the photo. "You might want to sit down." It was my father, smiling, proud, standing beside another man in a white lab coat. Marcus Denor. Their hands clasped like partners. The background was unmistakable. A medical lab, monitors glowing, the sterile gleam of surgical instruments. "Dear God," I whispered. "Your father wasn't just a financier," James said quietly. "He was one of them." I stared at the image until it blurred. "He helped start the program, the one that took my daughter. He tried to shut it down later," James said, gesturing to the drive. "According to Thornfield's notes, your father pulled funding when he realized what Denor was doing. That's probably why Denor arranged the car accident." My throat closed. "So he didn't die because of bad weather?" "No," James said softly. "He died because he grew a conscience." I looked down at the music box again, its warped melody looping endlessly, the dancer's porcelain face worn smooth by time. My father had hidden this piece of the truth, maybe as an apology, maybe as a lifeline for the daughter he knew would one day go looking. The coordinates carved into the tune pointed somewhere, maybe to more evidence, maybe to the graves of the other children. But we would need time to decode them, and time was the one thing we no longer had. "Let's copy the drive and get out," James said. He plugged the USB into his decryption unit, the small screen pulsing with blue light. Lines of data began scrolling, a stream of names, dates, locations, project identifiers. I leaned closer, heart hammering. "What's Project Elysium?" He didn't answer immediately. "Looks like genetic mapping, cognitive enhancement in utero, consciousness partitioning. They weren't studying chance, Victoria. They were engineering it." The full horror of it sank in. Sophie wasn't an accident. She was an experiment. A child designed to perceive probabilities the way others see color. My daughter had been created for a purpose she would never have chosen. I wanted to scream, but before I could, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then died. "Power cut," James muttered. "We're out of time." The sound came next, a faint metallic thud, followed by the rhythmic echo of boots in the corridor. More than one pair. James pulled his gun, motioning me toward cover behind the vault shelves. My pulse thundered in my ears. The building was supposed to be empty. The security feeds were looping. No one should have known we were here. The steps drew closer. The air pressure changed, a subtle warning before violence. "Grab the drive," James hissed. "Now!" I reached for it, my hands trembling, but the moment my fingers closed around the plastic sleeve, the world detonated. The vault door exploded inward, a blast of sound and heat knocking us both backward. My ears rang, vision fractured. Through the smoke, a figure stepped into the threshold, silver hair gleaming in the emergency lights, suit immaculate, smile deliberate. Marcus Denor. He looked at me the way a scientist might look at a specimen rediscovered after years in the dark. "Hello, Victoria," he said smoothly. "I thought you might come for what's mine." Before I could pocket the drive, the vault door exploded inward, and Denor walked in. He thought he'd created weapons. Instead, he'd created witnesses. Smoke still hung in the air like a curtain between worlds. My ears rang from the explosion, my body heavy with the shockwave. The vault's emergency lights flickered, casting the room in sickly red pulses. And there, framed in the doorway like a ghost conjured from my nightmares, stood Marcus Denor, immaculate, untouched, his calm smile the kind of arrogance only men who believed they owned the world could wear. He stepped over the debris with surgical precision, unbothered by the ruined door or the unconscious mercenaries sprawled in the corridor behind him. "You've inherited your father's curiosity," he said lightly, his voice barely audible over the hum of failing electricity. "I was wondering how long it would take before you started digging." I forced myself upright, the USB drive still clutched in my hand. "You murdered him," I said. "You took his research and turned it into human trafficking." He tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "Your father lacked vision. He wanted to understand human potential. I wanted to create it. That's what progress demands. Sacrifice." James moved to shield me, gun raised, but Denor didn't even flinch. "You won't shoot me," he said smoothly. "You're still hoping for answers." Then he turned back to me, his expression softening as though he were offering comfort. 37 children, he said, each one designed to test the limits of consciousness, pattern recognition, precognition, telepathic resonance. Sophie Chen, the strongest of them all. You call her daughter, I call her proof. His words made my skin crawl. "She's a child, not your experiment." "She's both," he said, "and you should be proud. The neural partitions that Thornfield created using your genetic map, your empathy, your drive, your intuition, they're what made her unique. She doesn't just see the future, Miss Sterling. She edits it." Something in his tone made the air colder. "What do you mean?" "Reality," he said simply, stepping closer. "It bends around her. Probability collapses wherever she focuses her attention. She's the living embodiment of quantum consciousness, the first of her kind, and soon, the last. Because you've led me right to her." The lights died completely. In the instant of total darkness, my instincts screamed, "Run!" But before I could move, a sound rippled through the room. Low, harmonic, almost like wind moving through water. Then came a voice. Small. Familiar. "Mom!" My heart stopped. "Sophie?" The emergency lights flickered back on, and she wasn't there. But something else was. Dozens of shapes materialized at the edges of the vault. Children, all between 6 and 14, their eyes faintly glowing in the dim red light. They appeared like heat shimmering off asphalt, forming solid outlines, real and impossible at once. Denor went still. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible. They're scattered. The handlers—" "Gone," said a girl's voice from behind him. She couldn't have been older than 13, her hair falling in dark waves around eyes that seemed to look straight through him. "You forgot what happens when the children start listening to each other." James raised his gun again, but the girl only shook her head. "No need," she said softly. "We're not here to kill him." I realized, with awe and terror mingling in equal measure, that I could hear her. But her lips didn't move. The voice echoed directly in my mind. "You're telepathic," I breathed. She smiled faintly. "We all are, in different ways. Sophie showed us where to find you." Denor staggered back, his composure cracking. She doesn't have that kind of reach." "She does now," the girl said, "because she stopped being afraid of you." One by one, the children began to glow brighter, their combined presence warping the air. The mercenaries behind Denor convulsed, their weapons jamming simultaneously, triggers refusing to pull. The smell of ozone thickened as sparks danced across the metal floor. Denor turned wild-eyed toward me. "You don't understand. Without me, they'll lose control. They'll burn the world trying to save it." I stepped forward. "No. Without you, they'll finally be free." The children's voices rose, not aloud, but inside my skull, a chorus of clarity and calm. "We remember." And then, all at once, the world bent. The air folded inward like a collapsing wave. Denor screamed as the light swallowed him, his form stretching, distorting, unraveling into fragments that shimmered for a moment before vanishing completely. When it was over, the vault was silent. Only the faint hum of power returning broke the stillness. James looked around, eyes wide. What the hell just happened? The telepathic girl turned toward me, her expression serene. He's gone, not dead. Just relocated. Somewhere between thoughts, between time. The whispers showed Sophie where to send him. A place where he can't hurt anyone again. I could barely find my voice. You did that? She nodded. All of us. Together. We've been hiding for years, scattered across the country. Sophie brought us here through dreams. She said it was time to finish what our mothers couldn't. I felt tears sting my eyes, not from grief, but from awe. These weren't monsters or weapons. They were children, stolen and remade, yet somehow still whole. The girl stepped closer, placing a hand over my heart. Sophie says you still have to tell the truth. Tomorrow still matters. The world has to know what they did to us. My throat tightened. Where is she? She's safe, the girl said softly. But she's tired. Using her power to find us took everything she had. She wanted to come here, but the whispers told her this part was yours. A faint hum rose again, the same harmonic tone from before. And one by one, the children began to fade, their bodies dissolving into light. Wait, I called. What happens now? The telepath looked back over her shoulder, her form flickering. Now you tell them, she said. You tell everyone. Sophie said the world can't heal from what it doesn't see. And then, just before she disappeared completely, her voice echoed through the vault, soft but undeniable. Tomorrow still matters. Tell the truth. The red lights flickered once more, and I was alone. With James, the music box, and the terrible, miraculous silence of survival. As the last child faded, a voice echoed, Tomorrow still matters. Tell the truth. At 11:47 a.m., I stood before the world ready to burn everything I'd built. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of the Dunor building was a cathedral of power. Polished mahogany, glass walls, and a skyline that glittered like the promise of immortality. I had stood here countless times before, sealing mergers worth billions, commanding rooms full of men twice my age. But this time, there would be no deal, no profit, no applause. This time, I was here to burn it all down. The cameras had been set up exactly as Sophie had drawn them. 3 networks, 2 independent streams, 1 global feed. My assistant, Patricia, had done as I'd asked, inviting not just shareholders and executives, but journalists, auditors, and government observers. It was, officially, the largest corporate broadcast of the decade. Unofficially, it was my reckoning. James Donnelly stood off to the side, his jaw tight, one hand resting protectively on the briefcase that held the USB drive. The documents inside were enough to topple empires. Ready? He asked. No, I said, but we do it anyway. The lights came up. Red tally lamps blinked. We're live. I looked straight into the camera, my reflection staring back through millions of screens around the world. My name is Victoria Sterling, I began. And everything you think you know about Sterling Industries, and about me, is a lie. The words left my mouth like a confession in a cathedral. I spoke of St. Bartholomew's Hospital, of the research program disguised as neonatal care, of the trafficking of newborns into government and private experiments. I told them about the selective memory suppression procedures, the falsified death certificates, the women whose children were stolen while they slept. I showed them evidence, certificates, photos, ledgers. The audience of executives shifted uneasily, but I didn't stop. I was one of those women, I said. 7 years ago, my child was taken from me by the same men who funded this company. I was made to forget her so that the project could continue. Gasps rippled through the room. Somewhere in the back, a camera shutter clicked. Then I revealed the photograph, the one of my father and Marcus Dunor in their white coats, smiling before a wall of monitors. My father helped start the program, I said, but when he tried to end it, Dunor killed him. The car accident was no accident. I played my father's recorded confession. the message hidden inside the porcelain music box. His voice trembled, distorted by years of static. "If you're hearing this, it means I failed to stop him. Denor is using the research to manufacture control. Over genes, over futures, over people. The children are not property. They are what humanity was meant to become, if guided by love, not greed. Victoria, forgive me. Protect them." As his words echoed through the boardroom, the camera lights reflected tears I didn't bother to hide. Then I told the world about Sophie, the little girl who had predicted my helicopter's explosion, who had saved 200 lives by seeing the future, who had spent her short life burdened with visions that were never hers to carry. "She is one of 37 children taken from their mothers," I said. "Each one born with extraordinary abilities, each one a victim of the same system that rewards silence and punishes truth. I was complicit by forgetting. I refused to be complicit by staying silent." Behind me, James moved to the panel on the wall. His hand hovered over the emergency alarm, the signal that would trigger our evacuation sequence. I gave a single nod. He pressed it. Sirens wailed through the tower, shrill and urgent. Executives jolted upright, panic rippling like heat. Red strobe lights began to flash, the building's automated voice cutting through the chaos. "Evacuation protocol activated. Please proceed to the nearest exit." Cameras caught every second of it. Millions of viewers watched as the world's most powerful corporation began to empty itself like a collapsing lung. Plan A was working. As the chaos mounted, I kept speaking. "Denor planned to destroy this evidence today," I said. "He filled this building with thermite, military-grade incendiaries designed to burn everything, including the truth. But he failed to consider one thing." I turned toward the nearest camera, letting the world see the steadiness in my eyes. He underestimated a mother's memory. The floor beneath us trembled once, the sound of the small, controlled fire James had set in the basement. It was spreading exactly as planned, tripping sensors, activating sprinklers, flooding the lower floors with suppressant foam. The thermite charges would never ignite. By the time the fire department arrived, the system would list it as an electrical failure. The evidence in this room, the drive, the files, the broadcast, would survive. And 217 people would walk out alive. As the alarms roared, I closed my statement. "Power built on silence always ends in fire," I said, "but from the ashes, something better can grow. My company is gone. My fortune is gone. But the truth remains. And the truth belongs to everyone." The feed cut as security personnel ushered us toward the stairwell. James carried the briefcase close, shielding it as water sprayed from overhead pipes. Somewhere above us, fire suppression drones began their descent. By the time we reached the street, the Denor building was a wet, smoking skeleton surrounded by flashing lights and shouting reporters. Authorities were already moving in. The FBI, the Department of Health, Interpol, agencies I'd tipped off anonymously in the hours before the broadcast. Denor's hidden network of shell companies and labs was unraveling in real time. The fallout was immediate. Sterling Industries' stock plummeted 94% in a single hour. Board members resigned, shareholders fled, sponsors denounced me publicly. And yet, for the first time in my life, I felt free. Somewhere far from the chaos, in a quiet house in Westchester, a 7-year-old girl sat cross-legged on a couch, watching the broadcast on an old television. Sophie's eyes glistened with the reflection of her mother standing against the world. Mrs. Park sat beside her, knitting forgotten in her lap, while Michael stood in the doorway, his expression a mix of fear and pride. When the feed ended, when the screen went dark and the world began to change, Sophie closed her eyes. The whispers in her head, the constant static of other timelines had gone silent. She exhaled softly, a sound that was almost a prayer. "She learned," Sophie whispered. "She chose us." In Westchester, Sophie exhaled. "She learned. She chose us." By nightfall, my company was ash, and for the first time I could breathe, When dawn broke over Manhattan the next morning, it rose on a city that no longer belonged to me. Sterling Industries, once a gleaming monument to ambition, was gone. Dissolved. Its logo stripped from the tower that had carried my name higher than it ever deserved to be. The skyline still bore its reflection, but only as smoke and memory. By noon, the news networks had declared it the fastest corporate collapse in modern history. Stockholders filed lawsuits that would never reach court. Board members who had once fought for my approval now scrambled to save themselves. Federal investigators had already seized what was left. Every server, every file, every hidden account. And me? I watched it all from the window of a modest rented apartment across the river, coffee cooling untouched in my hand, the city reduced to its bones by fog and distance. For years, I had defined myself by control. I had orchestrated hostile takeovers, negotiated with billionaires, bent markets to my will. But in the end, I had learned that control was just a performance, a way to hold back the tide of truth. Now, truth had swallowed everything. And for the first time in 7 years, I felt something like peace. The investigations moved fast. With the evidence I'd released, governments across 12 countries opened inquiries into Dunor Holdings and St. Bartholomew's. Arrests were made. Researchers, investors, politicians. The public called it the science scandal of the century. Dr. Marcus Thornfield was extradited from Switzerland and placed under federal protection after testifying that Dunor had coerced him into continuing the experiments. He handed over encrypted files, confirming everything: the trafficking, the neural mapping, the children. Marcus Dunor, however, was nowhere to be found. His name disappeared from records, his accounts frozen, his assets seized. But I knew the truth. He wasn't gone in the ordinary sense. He was erased, folded into the silence between heartbeats where the children had sent him. Legally, I was cleared of any wrongdoing. The memory suppression procedures and falsified documents proved I had been a victim, not an accomplice. But the law couldn't restore what had been lost. My fortune, my empire, my reputation, gone. And strangely, I didn't want them back. Reporters tried to chase me, of course. Cameras swarmed the courthouse steps when I emerged after the final hearing. "Miss Sterling, are you planning to rebuild? Will you start another company? What do you say to those who call you complicit?" Their questions came like bullets. I gave them one answer. "I don't rebuild from ashes," I said. "I learn how to live with them." Public opinion fractured along predictable lines. Some called me a hero, a woman who sacrificed her empire for truth. Others called me reckless, delusional, a narcissist hiding behind a scandal. But none of their words mattered. The only voice that mattered was silent. Sophie. I hadn't seen her since that night at the safe house. Michael's last message had been brief and cautious. "She's resting. The whispers are quiet for now. Don't come until she's ready." So I waited. For days that felt like years. At first, I tried to fill the time with paperwork, as if the collapse of my company could be organized into neat categories of loss. But every folder, every legal form, felt hollow. The language of business couldn't contain what I'd become. I found myself walking instead. Long, aimless walks through neighborhoods I'd never seen, through parks where no one recognized me. Sometimes I'd pass a child holding her father's hand and feel my throat tighten. Sometimes I'd stop outside toy stores, staring through the glass at music boxes that played soft, imperfect melodies. Every night, I replayed Sophie's voice in my mind. "You get to choose. Choose us." And slowly, the noise of the world faded into something quieter, simpler. The world had moved on quickly, as it always does. My name became a headline, then a footnote, then a case study in ethics courses. The truth I'd released had done its work. The other children were being found. One in Seattle, another in Toronto, a pair of twins in Berlin. Governments were arguing over jurisdiction, custody, human rights. But at least they were alive. Sophie's drawings had been right all along. The buildings fell, but the people lived. The world had burned, but not to end. It had burned to reveal. And yet, through all the vindication and destruction, I couldn't shake one truth. I had been the architect of my own emptiness. For 7 years, I'd built walls of steel and glass to protect myself from a loss I couldn't name. And in doing so, I had locked myself away from the one thing that could have saved me. Her. A week before Christmas, I took the train to Westchester. Snow was falling in slow, deliberate flakes, softening the sharp edges of the world. The streets were quiet, porches lit by amber bulbs, wreaths hanging crookedly on doors. I carried no gifts, just a folded piece of paper in my coat pocket, the purple crayon drawing Sophie had made, the one that read, "Choose Us." I walked up the narrow path to the apartment, the sound of my own heartbeat loud in my ears. Through the window, I saw faint light, movement, shadows, the warmth of a family I had only glimpsed from the outside. For a long time, I stood there, paralyzed by a fear I hadn't felt since the day I signed my first contract. Because this wasn't a deal to be negotiated, or a war to be won. This was something far more fragile. I thought of everything I had said on that broadcast, all the truths I had spilled to the world, and realized the hardest confession was the one I hadn't made, that I was still learning how to be someone's mother. Snow gathered on my shoulders. My fingers went numb around the drawing in my pocket. And finally, when I could no longer stand the silence, I climbed the 3 worn steps to their door and raised my hand to knock. Behind the wood, I heard laughter. Soft, unmistakable, full of life. For the first time in 7 years, I smiled. A week before Christmas, I stood outside their door, wondering if my daughter would open it. The woman who once commanded skyscrapers knocked on a humble apartment door. For 7 years, every door I'd opened had led to something transactional. A contract, a deal, a room full of men who measured my worth in market shares. But that night, as I stood before a modest apartment in Westchester, I realized this door was different. Behind it wasn't profit or power. Behind it was the one thing I'd spent my whole life running from and searching for at the same time. Home. Snow clung to the hem of my coat as I hesitated. The purple crayon drawing crumpled softly in my hand. You get to choose. Choose us. The words had guided me through chaos, through guilt and ruin, through the ashes of everything I thought mattered. I raised my hand and knocked. Once, lightly. Then again. The sound of movement came from inside, muffled voices, a chair scraping across the floor, and then the latch clicked. Michael stood in the doorway. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He looked different. Older, yes, but also lighter, as though the shadows that had once hollowed him had finally receded. His eyes searched mine, not with anger or suspicion, but with quiet understanding. "Victoria," he said softly. "Hi," I managed. The word felt small and inadequate for everything it needed to carry. He stepped aside. "Come in." The warmth hit me immediately. The smell of cinnamon and sugar, the faint hum of a space heater, the kind of domestic noise I'd never known how to make for myself. Mrs. Park sat in the corner, knitting with her usual quiet concentration, a plate of cookies cooling beside her. She looked up and smiled, her eyes sharp as ever. "The bird that flies from a burning house builds the strongest nest," she said, as if continuing a conversation we'd started weeks ago. "You found your way back." Before I could respond, I heard her. Sophie. She emerged from the hallway in a swirl of flannel pajamas, her hair mussed from sleep, her blue eyes clear and steady. The same impossible blue I saw every morning in my own reflection. For a moment, the world narrowed to just that sight. The little girl who had saved me on a helipad, who had carried visions too heavy for her small shoulders, who had looked at me once and seen what I couldn't see myself, who I was. She stopped a few feet away, clutching her stuffed elephant. You came. My throat tightened. I told you I would. I wasn't sure, she said simply. The whispers said you might be scared. I was, I admitted. But they also said I get to choose, and I chose this. Her expression softened, and she crossed the distance between us, wrapping her arms around my waist. The contact was tentative at first, then sure, like a key finally fitting into its rightful lock. It was such a simple thing, a child's embrace, but it undid me. I sank to my knees, holding her, breathing in the warmth of her hair, the faint scent of soap and cookies. The ache I'd carried for years, the hollow, unnamed grief, broke open, and for the first time, it didn't hurt. It healed. I missed you, she whispered. I laughed through tears. You didn't even know me. She pulled back just enough to look at me, her gaze solemn and sure. I always did. Behind us, Michael cleared his throat gently. We were just about to have cookies. Christmas batch. Mrs. Park insists sugar can heal the world. Mrs. Park gave a dignified nod. It helps. We moved to the kitchen table, the same one I'd once imagined in my dreams, worn but sturdy, its surface scattered with crayons and a half-finished puzzle. Sophie handed me a cookie shaped like a star. They're Mommy Amy's recipe, she said quietly. We make them every year. Daddy says she'd want you to have one too. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Thank you, I said finally. She sounds like she was kind. She was, Michael said softly. And she'd want you here. She always believed love wasn't about biology. It's about choice. We ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackle of the heater and Sophie humming under her breath. Not the wrong lullaby from my dreams, but a new one, a melody all her own. When the last cookie disappeared, Sophie climbed into my lap, curling against me like she'd been doing it all her life. The whispers are gone, she said suddenly. I froze. Gone? She nodded. They got quiet after the fire, after you told the truth. They said there's nothing left to fix, that everything's in the right place now. Her words landed with the finality of a closing chapter. The constant hum that had guided and haunted her, the whispers that had shaped our lives, were silent at last. What does that mean? I asked. She smiled, small and certain. It means the story's over. Michael met my eyes over her head. His expression carried a peace I hadn't thought possible for either of us. Maybe not over, he said. Maybe just rewritten. Mrs. Park looked up from her knitting. Stories never really end, she said. They just change hands. The rest of the evening unfolded like something fragile and sacred. We talked, not about conspiracies or experiments or the past, but about small human things. Favorite songs. The best way to make hot cocoa. Whether the first snow counted as lucky if it fell before Christmas. At one point, Sophie fetched her crayons and laid out a new sheet of paper. We need a new picture, she said, tongue poking from the corner of her mouth as she drew. When she finished, she handed it to me. It showed 3 figures standing beneath a sunrise. One tall, one medium, one small. No buildings falling, no fire, no darkness. Just light. At the bottom, in her neat, careful printing, she'd written, "We chose us." I felt something loosen in my chest, something I hadn't realized was still bound. After Sophie went to bed, I helped Michael clean up. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was full, a quiet that spoke of shared survival. She's happy, he said finally. More than I've seen in years. So am I said, and meant it. He hesitated. What will you do now? I looked toward Sophie's room, where faint laughter still drifted through the door. I think I'll start over. Not as a CEO, not as a survivor, just as her mother. He nodded, smiling faintly. That sounds like a good place to begin. When I left that night, the snow had deepened, turning the street into something that looked untouched by the world. I paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the stars reflected in the frozen puddles, and realized something simple and extraordinary. Love had done what power never could. It had rewritten everything. The city no longer needed my name in lights. The future no longer needed my control. Sophie had given me something better, a second chance at being whole. And somewhere behind that small apartment window, I knew she was dreaming, not of disasters or whispers, but of sunrises and beginnings. As Sophie took my hand, I realized love had done what power never could. It had rewritten the future. If this story left you wondering how far love can go to rewrite fate, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe and stay with us for the next chapter of The Untold.